This morning's passage is from Isaiah chapter 2, verses 1 through 5. This is what Isaiah, the son of Amos, saw concerning Judah and Jerusalem in the last days. The mountains of the Lord's temple will be established as the highest of the mountains. It will be exalted above the hills, and all nations will stream to it. Many people will come and say, "Come, let us go to the mountain of the Lord, to the temple of the God of Jacob, and he will teach us his ways, so that we may walk in his paths. The law will go out from Zion, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. He will judge between the nations, and he will settle disputes for many people, and they will beat their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. Nations will not take up swords against nations, nor will they train for war anymore. Come, descendants of Jacob, let us walk in the light of the Lord." And so ends this reading. Well, good morning. My name is David Prang. I'm one of the pastors here at the church. Pastor Doug and Jill are away visiting family down in near Philadelphia, and they're going to be returning back actually later today. So Doug will be in the office tomorrow morning. And can you believe that we are at the first day of Advent? It doesn't even seem like it's Christmas, but Christmas is going to be happening in 25 days, whether we like it or not, whether we're ready or not. So today what we're going to be talking about is how do we get ready for Christmas? And I was thinking back to in my childhood days about when I was getting ready for Christmas, my mom would bring out this Advent calendar. And so I got a picture of this Advent calendar. I don't know if you ever had this as a child, but each of the days we would go into the pocket and pick up one of these felt ornaments from the Christmas tree. And these felt ornaments would be a star, it could be an angel, a candy cane, a teddy bear, or even a rocking horse. And we wouldn't fight about it, but my parents probably would say that we would fight about it, but we would mix things up and so forth like that. But December 13th was my birthday, so I always got two different ornaments that my parents would put in. The first one was, of course, a football, and the second one was a Bible. And I was always so proud about that, and I think my siblings were jealous because I got to pick two things one day. But each of the day was a countdown to the most important day. And we all know the most important day was December 25th. And on December 25th, we would pick up, and it would simply be Jesus and the manger. And we would put that on the tree, and we would know that was the birth of Christ. That was the celebration, was Christmas morning. Now, do you remember how you got ready for Christmas as a child? And as you think back, you probably have some memories that stir in your mind about how you got ready for Christmas. Well, this morning, as I said, marks the first day of Advent. And a few weeks ago, Pastor Doug came into my office and said, "Hey, we're going to be going down to Philadelphia. We're going to see Jill's family. Would you be willing to preach on the first Sunday of Advent?" And he said, "The theme is on hope." And I said, "Sure, I can do that." He goes, do you need any practice? Do you need anything from me?" And I said, "No, I can probably handle it. I probably, heard many sermons on Advent." And so I began doing some work. And I looked at the history and the meaning of Advent, and how the early church celebrated Advent and Christmas. And I began to realize what I thought I knew, I didn't know very much at all about the history and the meaning of Advent. And unfortunately, if I'm thinking to myself as I was preparing this sermon to you today, that if I didn't know very much about it, maybe there might be some people in the congregation that knows a little less than me about Advent. So this morning, we're going to be spending most of our time on the history and learning more about Advent, and then we'll focus on the theme, which is the real theme of today, is on hope. Okay? And that's how we're going to lay out today's sermon. But before we get started, I just thought to get our attention, on how do teachers get their attention at school? Do you remember? With a quiz. So I thought I would give you guys a little quiz about how much you knew about Advent. And it's multiple choice. There's no stress involved. You don't know it. Let somebody else shout the right answer when I ask for it. But here's our quiz. It's 5 questions, multiple choice. Okay, we ready? Oh, look at that. We have a dynamite sounds team. Okay, question number 1. It says, what does Advent mean? 1, or A, going. B, coming. C, buying presents, or D, time to make pies for Christmas? Okay, the correct answer would be B. For those that said B, it's coming. Great job. For those that said A, going, you're wrong. Sorry about that. For those that wanted to make pies for Christmas, I give you some lenience on that one. Okay, number 2, Advent reminds us to anticipate the coming of the birth of Jesus, the second coming of Jesus, marking the end of times, both A and B, or D, Christmas time bonuses. So Advent reminds us to anticipate the coming of C. Whoa, I tell you, you're going to learn something here. It's about the birth of Jesus, and it's also about the second coming of Jesus, marking the end of times. Okay, question number 3. They get more challenging. The first 2 weeks of Advent was focused on looking back to the birth of Christ, looking forward to the second coming of Christ, gifts I should buy for my family, or gifts that I should buy for myself. The first 2 weeks of Advent was to focus on which letter? Oh, we're a mixture of stuff. The answer is B. Looking forward to the second coming of Christ. How are we doing, guys? Okay, question number 4. How did the early Christians get ready for Christmas? They watched football on Thanksgiving and went shopping on Black Friday. B, they bought presents for their household, their friends, and themselves. C, they decorated the house and put up a Christmas tree. Or D, 40 days of penance, prayer, and fasting, very similar to Lent at Easter time. The correct answer is D. I never even knew about this one. The 40 days of penance, prayer, fasting, very similar to Lent at Easter time. And our last question, hopefully you guys can get this one correct. The key theme of Advent, is it shopping, Christmas movies, church, and presents? Is it Santa, reindeer, cookies, and presents? Or is it C, hope, faith, joy, and peace? The correct answer is C. You guys are in unison on that one. You guys know about the Advent candles. Hope, faith, joy, and peace. Well, I just wanted to have some fun this morning before we get really started into this sermon. As I mentioned earlier, we're in a 4-week series on Advent where we're going to look at each one of those candles and each one of those words, faith, or hope, faith, joy, and peace. And this morning, like I said, we're going to spend more time on the meaning of Advent because obviously from the quiz, some of us could use it, okay? And then we'll spend a smaller time on the word hope. So let me get started with the opening question. And the opening question is, what is Advent and why do we celebrate Advent? See, Advent comes from the Latin word, which literally means coming, as you guys already knew that from the quiz. But who is coming? And why is this important? And who is coming is simply that Jesus is coming. God's Son is coming. And this morning we read from 2 scriptures passages from the book of Isaiah. And Isaiah was a man who lived 700 years before Jesus, and he was also a prophet. And a prophet would go around telling, basically, giving a message from God in order to how people should live, but also about the future, about what to anticipate, what to come. In the first passage that Barbara read, we learned about the prophecies of the Old Testament about the birth of Christ. And Isaiah shared that the baby would be born of a virgin, that he would be the coming Messiah, and then he would come by names like Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, and Prince of Peace. And we know him as God's Son, which would be Jesus. In the second passage that I read from the book of Isaiah dealt with the second coming of Jesus. It was an opportunity where people would know that Jesus was going to come again one day. And Jesus' return here on earth, he would restore perfection and righteousness into a broken world. Every nation would see him as king. People would see him as ruler, and he was the final judge of all time. So what is Advent about? If someone came to you and said, what is Advent about? you just simply say two things. The first thing, it's about the birth of Christ that happened over 2,000 years ago. And say the second thing is, it's about the Christ coming back one day in the future. And both these events are very important in Advent. So just remember, the birth of Christ and Christ coming back one day. Which leads me to the second question is, when did Christians begin to celebrate Advent? Have they been always doing it since the time of Jesus? No. Have they been only doing it in the last 50 years? No. They've been doing it since the 6th century. And what I found kind of interesting was when they started celebrating Advent in the 6th century, it was entirely focused on the second coming of Christ. It was not about the birth of Christ at all. It was all about Jesus coming back one day to rescue the people, to rescue Christians. Because Christians were going through a difficult time. They were going through struggles and heartache, and they were always looking forth about Jesus coming back and being the ruler and being the king, and he would bring peace upon the earth. It wasn't until the Middle Ages that the church got together and said, you know what, we need to focus upon not only about Jesus' second coming, but also about the birth of Christ. And that's just as important. And the church council got together and they decided the first 2 weeks of Advent, we would focus on the Old Testament passages about the second coming of Christ. And then week 3 and 4, we would change our focus upon the birth of Christ. And we would find New Testament passages that we would talk about the prophecies about Jesus coming. In growing up, I only heard one side of things. I think my family and our church, we focus upon the birth of Christ. So by preparing this sermon and reading a little bit about history, I'm reminded that it's about both. The birth of Christ and the second coming of Christ. And it's just something I found to be cool, and hopefully you found it to be cool and interesting as well. Well, the next question is a little bit more concerning. It says, how do most people get ready for Christmas? How do most people get ready for Advent? This past Thursday, we celebrated what holiday? Thanksgiving, right? And everybody had these wonderful meals, and most people, they kind of officially turned the page sometime on Thanksgiving Day. For some people, they rushed and got a newspaper. They looked through all the ads. They circled the things they wanted for Black Friday, and they already turned the page to Christmas. But for some other people, it wasn't until they ate the Thanksgiving meal, sat down and had Thanksgiving pie. And then they said to themselves, you know what, I think it's now 3.5 weeks until Christmas. I better get ready for it. See, I believe many people get ready for Christmas by shopping. We have 2 of the biggest shopping days of the year, right? Black Friday and Cyber Monday, where millions of people go out and shop for their family, for their friends, and for themselves. People love to give gifts for Christmas. Besides shopping, what do most people do? And how do people get ready for Christmas? And they may include with going out and getting a Christmas tree and decorating their homes. Maybe for some people it's about making Christmas cookies or sending Christmas cards. For others people, it's about listening to Christmas music and singing along to the songs. And I believe for some people, they think about Christmas. One of the activities that they do is they come to church on Christmas Eve to celebrate the birth of Christ. And these are all ways in which people celebrate Christmas. But I believe if you ask most people what their focus is on Christmas time, it's simply this. Their primary focus is on what? Presents, family, food, and parties. When you think about your calendar, what do you primarily focus on? It's the presents you have to get. It's the family members and seeing family. It's the food that you got to make for what? The parties. And then everybody seems like they have a number of Christmas parties that they go to. But let's compare that to the early church. The early Christians, and how did the early church, and how did the early Christians celebrate Advent and Christmas? I think it was very different. And for centuries, Advent and Christmas was a time of preparation and anticipation of Jesus. In fact, most people looked at Christmas as a time to get their heart ready for Christ. They wanted to be spiritually connected for the day of Christmas. Advent was marked actually by the 40 days of penance, which I knew nothing about until this week. Honestly, I had no idea. And what is the 40-day of penance? You think about Lent. And with Lent, you have like Ash Wednesday, and some in traditions, you give up certain items or certain food to focus more on God. Well, they used to do the same thing with the 40 days of penance. It was a time of prayer and fasting. And people would get ready for Christmas by spending time with God every single day, like cleaning themselves and making them just more connected with God. And I find it fascinating the way the early church and the early Christians for centuries went about celebrating Advent versus compared to how we celebrate Advent and Christmas today. Amazing the contrast. See, I believe Advent is a time for each of us to focus more upon God and God's Son. To take time of every day that we usually spend doing all these activities getting ready for Christmas. But we miss out on the most important, which is our time with Jesus. So this holiday season, this Christmas season, what I ask you to do is take 5 minutes every day and just focus upon Jesus. I know it may seem hard to do, but it's something that will be rewarding. It will connect us. And it's not for 40 days, because we have Christmas in only 25 days. So for 3 weeks, spend more time focusing on Him, and maybe a little less on the other activities that we partake at Christmas time. Which really leads me to the next question is, how do we get ready for Christmas? What can we do to be more focused upon God? What are things that we can build into our life to be more focused upon Him? And I think the easiest thing would basically by spending some time praying and reading our Bibles. Just even reading the Christmas story from the 4 different Gospels. It's going to connect us, and we're going to feel more connected to God by doing this. And I believe that our heart will go closer to God in our life. And I'm just saying, spend 5 to 10 minutes every day focusing more on God. The second thing that you could do is, and we kind of did this as a church, we get a wreath and we get candles, and we celebrate Advent. And this is something that my family did every year that I was growing up. And we would take turns. Who was going to read the scripture? Who was going to light the candle? And who was going to say a closing prayer? And let me tell you, it only takes 10 minutes. And you can get on the internet and look up, Advent wreath or scripture verses that go along with it. But it's just another way in which you can stay focused on the real reason of Christmas. What are some other things that we can do? A third thing is, I talked about it earlier, was an Advent calendar. And they sell these things still.